Alright, this is our next video in the series on quadratic equations. And in this video, we're going to continue to look at perfect square quadratic equations. So, a perfect square is that the two factors we multiply together are exactly the same. So, a plus 5 times another a plus 5, the exact same term, 2 times. So our two factors are the same. And another way to write this is a plus 5 squared, meaning writing it 2 times, being multiplied. All right, so let's look at our first example. In this case is a plus 7 squared. So the other way to write that is an a plus 7 times an a plus 7. So to evaluate this multiplication, we're going to run it through this distribution box. We're going to get a plus 7 on the side. We're going to get a plus 7 on the top. And we multiply to get the first box, a times a squared. And then the a times the positive 7 gives you plus 7a. And here, for this box, 7 times a, positive times positive, plus 7a. And our last box, a plus 7 multiplied times a plus 7. And it gives us a plus 49. So we write these 4 boxes all stretched out here, and we see if we can combine like terms, which ones can go together. So looking at this, how many a's do we have all together? We'll add them together. So here we have 7 a's, and here we have 7 more a's. And these are positive 7 a's, and these are positive 7 a's. So 7 plus 7 gives us 14 a's. Okay. These here don't have any a's in them. It's a 49, it's a constant, there's no a's. And the thing up front, this is an a squared. That's a different kind of a variable than an a, because it's being squared. So you can't put them together. These aren't like terms. So this is it. We're done with this thing. All right, so we took two factors that were the same, and we got a quadratic equation. So that's a perfect square is quadratic. Now notice that the middle term here is 14. It's 2 times 7. The number from inside our original parentheses from our factor was 7. And the middle term of our quadratic equation is 2 times that 7. That's always the case. It's perfect square is quadratic. That the middle term is always 2 times whatever the number was inside your factor. And the last term, the 49, is always the number from inside your parentheses being squared. So 7 squared. So the 49 is 7 squared, and the 14 is 2 times 7. And that's always the case with perfect squares quadratic equations. All right, let's look at another example. In this case, we're factoring them apart. Okay, so we've got our quadratic equation, and we're going to factor it apart. So the tool we're using to factor is our puzzle box. And the number that goes on top of the puzzle box is chosen from here. It is that last number that goes on the top. It's a positive 64. And the number that goes on the bottom, it's right here in the middle. It's the middle number. It's a positive 16. So what can you multiply together? It gets to 64. And when you add it together, you get to 16. So you could pause the video and think about it for a second, or we can just move on ahead. 8 times 8 is 64, and 8 plus 8 is 16. So positive times positive gives you positive, and a plus 8 plus another 8 gives you positive 16. So our two factors here for this quadratic are going to be an a plus 8 and an a plus 8. So this is a perfect squares quadratic. There's two factors, and they're both exactly the same. This is an a plus 8, and that's an a plus 8. So another way to write that would be a plus 8 squared, 2 times. And again, notice, because it's a perfect squares quadratic, the middle term is 2 times the number from inside the parentheses. 2 times 8 is 16. There's your 16 right there from the original quadratic. And the last term of the quadratic, the 64, it's the 8 from inside the parentheses, 8 squared gives you the 64. And that's always the case with perfect quadratics. The term inside, 2 times the number inside the parentheses. Number at the end of the quadratic is this number inside the parentheses from the factor, squared. All right, let's look at some classwork problems. And if you want to pause the video, try and do this one. We're going to factor this quadratic equation. Okay, so if you're done getting it factored, and let's look at my answer and compare it to your answer. We'll see if we got the same thing. 8 plus 10 squared. Notice that the number at the end of the quadratic equation is 10 squared. And the number in the middle of the quadratic equation is 10 times 2. 2 times 10 is 20. Okay, so let's try another one. Factor this one, pause the video, and then we'll compare our two equations. Okay, I got 8 plus 6 squared. And again, notice the number inside of our factor, the 6, and it's a positive 6. 6 squared is 36, and 2 times 6 is 12. It's always the case with perfect squares quadratic equations. This is 2 times the number, and this is the number squared. All right, let's look at another example. Okay, we're going to talk about the zero product property. This is to actually solve an equation, meaning to find out what number is A. Okay, so how does zeros work? 0 times stuff, right? And whatever this stuff may be, if it's multiplied by 0, 0 times whatever it is going to give you back a 0. 0 times anything gives you back a 0. So it doesn't really matter what this is here. If that is 0, then 0 times whatever this is gives you 0. Okay? And how about if you went the other way? Here you have some stuff, an a minus 4, and you're going to multiply it times a 0. Well, the way zeros work is 0 times whatever you multiply it times is going to give you back 0. 0 times 3 is 0, 0 times 9 is 0, 0 times anything is 0. So it doesn't really matter what's inside this parentheses. If inside this one you have a 0. 0 times anything is 0, so 0 times a minus 4 is 0. So what's the zero product property? Well, the zero product property tells you that when you multiply two things together and the answer is 0, one of them has to be 0. Either this one is 0 or that one is 0. You can't multiply two things together and get an answer of 0 unless one of those two things is 0. So it works both ways. Well, if you know that one of the things you're multiplying is 0, then you know your answer is 0. But also, zero product property, if you know that your answer is 0, then you know that one of the two things you multiplied together had to have been 0. You don't know which one, but you know one of these two things had to have been 0, or you could not have multiplied them together and got to 0. All right, let's look at another example here of the zero product property. Okay, so we're multiplying these two things together, and the answer is 0. Well, by the zero product property, we know that either that thing has to be 0, or that thing has to be 0. And we're going to find out what number A actually is. What is A that would make this thing true? That this times this is 0. A equals to what? Well, if this is 0, right, then this is true. So 0 times a plus 6 is 0, right? If the a minus 1 is 0, then 0 times this is going to be 0. 0 times a plus 6 is 0. So what would make this thing 0? What is a minus 1 is equal to 0? A minus 1 has to be 0, right? And then this would be true, because 0 times this one, it gives you 0. So let's turn the a minus 1 into a 0. A minus 1 equals to 0. Okay, then this thing here is then 0, and 0 times whatever that is gives you 0. So what would a have to be for a minus 1 to be 0? What does a have to be to make this true? Well, let's solve this for a. So we're going to have to move this negative 1 to the other side. So what are you going to put with this negative 1 to move it to the other side? Well, if we add a 1 here, then minus 1 plus 1 goes away, but you had to add a 1 to the other side of the equal sign. So you end up with a on this side of the equal sign and a 1 on that side of the equal sign. So a equals to 1. That would solve this equation. So if you had a equals to 1, this thing here turns into a 0, and 0 times whatever that is gives you 0. So a equals to 1 makes this equation true. So we have solved this equation for A. For at A, is this true? For A equals to 1, this is true. Because 1 minus 1 is 0, and 0 times A plus 6 is 0. All right, but wait, maybe that's not the only way to solve this equation. Because also, if this A plus 6 was 0, then you'd have A minus 1 multiplied times, now this becomes 0 times 0 equals to 0. This would be true. So the other way that we could solve this equation is for whatever the A is that would make A plus 6 into a 0. Well, what makes A plus 6 equal to 0? What would A have to be for A plus 6 to be 0? Well, let's solve this equation here for A, and we'll find out what the other answer is, because there's two answers for this problem. A equals to 1 is one answer, but what's the other answer? Well, A plus 6 equals to 0. Let's move the 6 to the other side, minus the 6 from this side, then you minus the 6 from that side. So A had to be equal to negative 6. So we have two answers for this equation, where they actually answered the equation. What would A have to be for this statement right here to be true? A could be 1, and the A minus 1 turns into 0, and this is true. Or A could be a negative 6, and the A plus 6 turns into a 0, and this becomes true. 0 times A minus 1 is 0. All right, let's look at another example. Here we have a quadratic equation, right? And you notice that it's equal to 0. We've taken this quadratic equation and we've set it equal to 0. Okay, and we're going to try to find out if we can solve it. Meaning to actually find out what number is A. Is A 3? Is it 9? What is A that would make this true? Okay, so the first step is let's take this quadratic equation and let's break it up into its two factors, which means we're going to use the quadratic puzzle box. So on top of the puzzle box, looking at our equation, we're going to put this last term here. It's a negative 16. And on the bottom of the equation, we're going to take this term here from the middle, the negative 6, put it on the bottom. So the negative 16 to the top, the negative 6 to the bottom. So what do the two factors have to be? What goes on this side and what goes on that side? What do you multiply together to get to a negative 16? And then you would add it together to get to a negative 6. Well, shall we try 2 times 8? 2 times 8 is 16, and a negative times a positive gives you a negative. So negative 2 and a positive 8 gives you the negative 16. But does it give you the negative 6? Well, let's see. You have 8 positives and you take away 2 negatives. So you get more positive than negatives, so the answer is going to be positive. So no, this gives you a positive 6 and you want a negative 6. So we're going to have to try something else. Something you multiply together to get to a negative 16 and you add it to get to a negative 6. Well, how about if we try the other way around? We'll make a positive 2 and a negative 8, because 2 times 8 is 16, and positive times a negative gives you the negative. Okay, so this works to get you the negative 16, but does it work to get you the negative 6? We have a positive 2, and you're putting it with a negative 8. We have more negatives here than you have positives, so the answer is going to be negative, and the difference between 2 and 8 is in fact 6. So there's your winner right there. 2 times negative 8 gives you negative 16, and 2 minus 8 gives you a negative 6. So put these two back up into our factors, and here's our two factors. A plus 2 and A minus 8. Okay, now remember what we're trying to accomplish here. We factored this quadratic into these two factors, but that's not what we want to finish with. What we want to finish with is to find out what value of A will make this equal to 0. Well, if this, the quadratic, is equal to 0, then it means these two factors multiplied together have to be equal to 0, because these two factors multiplied together is equal to the quadratic. So if the quadratic is 0, then multiplying these two together is also equal to 0. So let's find out what would make these two things multiplied together equal to 0. Well, there's two ways. If the first one was 0, then we'd have 0 times the second one gives you 0. And the other way, you can multiply these two together to get to 0, is the second one would be equal to 0. And then this factor times 0 would give you 0. So we're going to use the zero product property that one of the two has to be 0 in order to get to 0. So let's try to make the first one 0. A plus 2 is 0. What would A have to be? Let's move this 2 to the other side of the equal sign. So it's a plus 2. So you have to put a minus 2 with it to get rid of it. So plus 2 minus 2, that's gone. And now you have 0 and a minus 2 on this side of the equal sign. So A is equal to minus 2. All right, now how about the other one? You have A minus 8 equals 0. And move the 8 to the other side, a negative 8 and a positive 8. That cancels out, and you end up with A equals positive 8. Okay, so here's your two answers. You have two answers to this question of how does this equal 0. If A was negative 2, and you put negative 2 squared minus 6 times negative 2, and take away 16, you would get to 0. This is one answer, a solution for this equation. So we solved it for A equals negative 2. And this is the other one. If A was 8, and you put 8 in for A, and evaluated this equation, you'd also get 0. So these are the two ways to get to 0 for this equation. We've solved for A. Okay, so now let's do classwork. And we ask you to do exactly the same thing, to take a quadratic equation, break it into factors, and then find out what makes those two factors into 0. So you may have to come back and rewatch this slide over again, but okay, here's the classwork problems. Okay, now in these classworks, remember, you got to do two things. First, you got to find the two factors. Then you got to figure out what value of A would make each one of those factors 0. So let's try the first one. Find your two factors, and then we'll look at the factors I got. All right, let's look at the two factors I got for the first one. Okay, there we go. I'll multiply those two factors together, and you get that quadratic equation. Okay, now the next step is figure out what value of A would make each one of those factors 0. So in the first factor, A minus 3, you can see if A was a positive 3, 3 minus 3 would turn this into a 0. And on the second factor, if A was a 6, a positive 6, 6 minus 6 would turn this into 0. So therefore, our two possible values of A, the two solutions for this quadratic equation, are A is 3 and A is 6. Okay, pause your video, you try the next one, and then we'll check out what are the factors, and then what are the two values of A. Pause your video. All right, let's have a look at it. Okay, so for this one here, factors, and pause your video, the two solutions. There. Okay, let's try the next one. Same thing. Find your two factors, and then we'll find the two solutions. Pause the video. Okay, factors, and pause your video. Okay, solutions. There they are. Okay, last one. Same thing. Pause your video. Okay, factors, there, and then solutions to the quadratic equation are negative 2 and 8. So notice that if you take 2 squared, negative 2, right, squared, negative 2 times negative 2, that gives you a 4. And you take negative 2 times negative 6, negative times negative is positive, 2 times 6 is 12, that's a 12. So 4 and 12 is 16. So 16, take away 16 is 0. So negative 2 is the solution to this quadratic equation. And you can do the same thing with the 8. Plug the 8 in where the A is, and you'd get 0. So these are the two numbers that solve this quadratic equation. Okay, example 6. We're going to solve for A. Here is your quadratic equation. Okay, here we go again. So the first step we're going to use is we're going to find out what the two factors are. We're going to break this into factors. So in order to break it into factors, we're going to want a puzzle box. So here's your puzzle box. The number that goes to the top of the puzzle box is this number right here on the end, plus 16. And the number goes to the bottom of the puzzle box, this number right here, a plus 8. So what could you multiply together to get to a 16, and you add it together to get to an 8? And you can pause the video while you think about that, or here we go. 4 times 4 is 16. Positive times positive is positive. And 4 plus 4 is 8. And positive 4 plus positive 4 is a positive 8. So here's your two factors. A plus 4 equals 0. Now notice this is a perfect square quadratic, right? These two terms that you're multiplying together are exactly the same. Okay, so in order to find out what A has to be to make this statement true, we're going to take them one at a time. What would make this term here 0? And then over here, what would make this factor 0? Right? Because either factor is 0, either one of them, it makes it 0. So that's the zero product property. All you need to know is that one of them has to be 0. So we do them one at a time. Makes it a much simpler problem because you do them one at a time. We do this half of the problem, find out what that's 0, and then we do this half of the problem, find out what makes that 0. Okay, so the first one, A plus 4 is 0. So we're going to move the 4 to the other side. Plus 4 minus 4. Got rid of the 4. So all we got left on this side is the A, and on the other side you have the minus 4. So A equals minus 4 would make this quadratic equation here true. This would be equal to 0 if A was equal to negative 4. Okay, so now we're going to do the other one. Well, it's exactly like this one, because A plus 4 is equal to 0. Move the 4 to the other side, and you have A is minus 4. Well, because the terms, the two factors, are exactly the same, it's not surprising that the answer of what would make each one of them 0 is also exactly the same. If A is minus 4 plus 4 would be 0. And over here also, minus 4 plus 4 is 0. So in this case, there really is only one solution to this equation, not two, because in both cases, it's the same solution. It's A is minus 4, or A is also minus 4. Okay, so let's go do another classwork. Same thing over again. First step, get your puzzle box out, find out what the factors are, and set each factor equal to 0. And find out what A would make each one 0, because we're solving for A. We're trying to find out what is A equal to what number that would make this true. Pause your video. All right, let's compare answers for the first one. I got A is equal to negative 12. That's the only possible way that this would be true, is if A was negative 12. All right, let's look at the next one. For the next one, we've got okay. For this one here, I got A is negative 11. The only way this thing could be true is if A was a negative 11. And our last one, A is equal to a negative 8. And so if A is negative 8, then this one would be equal to 0. Okay, so let's look at another example. Here we go again. Here's our quadratic equation. It's set equal to 0, and we're going to solve for A. We're going to find out what value of A would make this quadratic equation equal to 0. Okay, first step, the puzzle box. The number that goes on the top, there it is, the number on the end. The number on the end always goes to the top, the number in the middle always goes to the bottom. And don't forget, if it's a negative 14 in here, then the negative 14. And if it's a positive 49, it's positive 49. So positive 49 to the top, negative 14 to the bottom. What's possibly multiplied together to get to 49? Well, notice that it's positive on the top, it's negative on the bottom. This is another case where you have to have both these numbers being negative, because there's no way that this is going to be positive unless both these numbers are negative. And you know at least one of them had to be negative because that's negative on the bottom. So they could both be positive, and you could never get a negative on the bottom. So since at least one of them is negative, they both have to be negative. So let's try 7 and 7 is 49, and minus 7 plus another minus 7 gives you minus 14. So here's your two factors multiplied together. We're going to find out what makes this factor 0, and that'll be one of our answers. Then we're going to find out what makes this factor 0, and that'll be our other answer. So we're going to use, that's the zero product property. One of these two has to be 0. So a minus 7 is 0. So what does 7 have to be? Well, let's move the 7 to the other side. It's a minus 7. So we're going to put a plus 7 with it. So it's gone off of this side. And we have a equals to 7. So a equals to 7 makes this term 0. So a equals to 7 is one of the solutions to this equation. Okay, now let's look at the other one. What makes this term 0? Well, a minus 7 is equal to 0 if, move the 7 to the other side, a is 7. So it's the same answer. And it shouldn't be surprising it's the same answer. This is a perfect squares quadratic. Both these terms are exactly the same. So it's not a surprise that they both have exactly the same answer for a that would make this 0. That same a makes that 0. Okay, last classwork set. Perfect squares polynomial. Okay, solve this one, right? That's our instruction, solve for a. So what value of a would make this true? So pause your video. Okay, let's compare your answer to my answer. I got a equals a positive 6 would make this true. Okay, so pause the video, try the last one. Okay, last problem. What makes this true? I got a equals a positive 4. Okay, thank you for watching the video.